Jace moved carefully through the ruined jungle of Varian 6, stepping over broken metal vines and shattered glass-like stones that once formed part of an alien research station. Everything around him felt strangely quiet, like the planet was holding its breath. The war that had torn this world apart had ended months ago, but the scars were everywhere: burned trees, melted ground, and strange pockets of unstable gravity that hummed under his boots. He had been sent here as part of a human search team, tasked with finding survivors or lost technology before the planet became completely abandoned. Most of the other groups had already returned. But Jace worked slowly, double-checking every strange signal. That habit kept him alive more times than he could count. His scanner blinked suddenly, showing an energy spike somewhere ahead. He frowned, tapping the side of the device. The spike was strong, too strong for leftover tech. Something was active. Something alive. He pushed a few branches aside and stepped deeper into the thick greenery, feeling the humidity cling to his skin. The air smelled of metal dust and old smoke, mixed with the natural sweetness of alien flowers fighting to grow again. He finally reached a clearing, and that's when he saw it. A glowing sphere floating a few feet above the cracked ground. It shimmered with blue and silver light, like frozen lightning trapped inside glass. Jace stopped moving instantly. He recognized the design from old intel files. It was a cryo-containment pod, an emergency device used by some alien civilizations to preserve wounded warriors or important individuals. They were extremely rare. Jace approached slowly, raising his scanner. The readings were unstable, as if the pod had been activated during the final hours of the war and left alone ever since. But something inside was moving. A faint silhouette, a figure curled into a protective position, suspended in the center of the sphere. He stepped closer, careful not to touch it, and the light allowed him to see more clearly. Inside was a female. A tall, slender, alien woman with shimmering silver skin and long hair that floated like threads of light around her. Her armor was decorated with elegant patterns, though the metal was cracked in several places. She was stunning in a way Jace had never seen, not just beautiful, but regal, like someone who belonged to some ancient noble order. Her eyes were closed, her hands weakly pressed against the inner barrier as if she had been reaching out before losing consciousness. Jace exhaled softly. He knew what he had found. A survivor. Maybe even a high-ranking one. His heart beat faster at the thought. This was far beyond his usual missions. She looked fragile, as if the cryo-energy was barely keeping her alive. It wasn't a hostile trap. It was a life capsule, failing slowly. He checked his scanner again and realized the pod's power would collapse within minutes. If it dropped suddenly, she could be injured, or worse. He knew he had to help her. He moved around the sphere, searching for the manual override. But the device was alien. Its controls glowing in strange shapes rather than simple buttons. After a few seconds, he found a panel half buried under rubble. He brushed dirt away and used his multi-tool to gently pry it open. The panel clicked, revealing embedded symbols. Jace recognized a universal emergency sign etched in one corner. He touched it cautiously. The sphere flickered, its light dimming for a moment. Jace stepped back, unsure what he had activated. The energy rippled outward, and he felt his hair rise from the static. Then the sphere sank slowly until it hovered just above the ground. The glow softened, and the silhouette inside began to drift downward. He could hear faint cracking sounds as the cryo-shell dissolved like melting ice. The woman's body lowered carefully onto the ground as the energy faded completely. The sphere vanished, leaving only the forest's natural noises. She lay on the ground, breathing faintly, her armor dented and dusty. Jace carefully stepped closer, kneeling beside her. Her chest rose and fell very slowly. She wasn't conscious, but she was alive. He scanned her quickly. The readings showed dehydration, minor internal injuries, and an energy imbalance that he didn't fully understand. Nothing fatal, but she needed help soon. Her fingers twitched, and Jace froze. Her eyes opened slowly, revealing bright violet irises that glowed faintly in the dim light. For a moment, she stared at him without expression. Then fear flashed across her face. She tried to sit up but winced in pain, collapsing against the ground. Jace raised his hands gently. "Easy. You're safe," he said softly. But she didn't understand his language. Her lips moved, forming words in a tongue filled with harmonics. She pushed herself backward, clearly threatened, her breath trembling. He knew it was natural. She had been trapped in a cryo state for who knew how long. Waking up to a human stranger would scare anyone. Before he could reassure her further, the ground shook slightly. A low rumble spread through the clearing. Jace snapped around and saw shadows shifting between the trees. The scanner on his wrist beeped urgently. Something big was heading toward them. He didn't know what creature it was. But the planet was known for mutated wildlife after the war. He pulled out his blaster instinctively. The alien woman's eyes widened as she sensed danger. She tried to get up again but couldn't stand. Her legs trembled. She looked at Jace, breathing fast, unsure if he would run or leave her behind, but he shook his head. "I've got you," he said, even if she couldn't understand. A massive creature burst from the foliage, a four-legged beast with armored scales, glowing red stripes, and razor-sharp mandibles. It roared loud enough to shake the trees. Jace fired a warning shot, hitting the ground in front of it. The beast snarled and lunged forward. Jace grabbed the alien woman gently but firmly, helping her roll behind a fallen metal slab for cover. The beast slammed into the slab with incredible force, sending cracks through it. Jace fired again, aiming at its exposed joints. The creature staggered, shrieked, and swung its tail, smashing into a tree behind him. The alien woman flinched, clutching her wounded side. She reached toward Jace as if urging him to be careful. He didn't retreat. He stepped forward and fired several precise shots. The creature screeched one last time, before collapsing. For a moment, everything was silent again except for Jace's heavy breathing and the faint hum of the jungle. When he turned back to her, she stared at him with disbelief. Not fear. Not panic. Something closer to shock and confusion. She had expected him to abandon her. Instead, he had protected her without hesitation. Jace approached slowly and knelt beside her again. She didn't pull away this time. He opened a small medkit and showed her the healing spray. She watched carefully, still unsure. But she didn't resist when he applied the cool mist to her injured side. The wounds began to glow softly as the nanites worked. She touched her chest and spoke her name softly. "Sailari," Jace repeated it. "Sailari." She seemed surprised that he tried to pronounce it correctly. Her violet eyes softened for the first time. She lifted a hand weakly and touched his chest, near where his name tag was clipped. She tried to read it, whispering the letters slowly. "Ja. Si." He nodded with a small smile. She had understood. He helped her sit upright, supporting her gently. She looked around the clearing, recognizing the destroyed environment. Something about the damage made her expression darken. She whispered something in her language, sounding grief-stricken. Jace didn't know what she said, but he understood loss when he heard it. He motioned toward a safer direction, offering her his hand. He didn't grab her. He let her choose. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. Her grip was weak, but the trust in that simple gesture felt strong. Together, they left the clearing, walking slowly through the broken jungle. She leaned against him at times, but she didn't seem embarrassed or afraid now. Instead, she kept glancing at him as if trying to understand why a human would help someone like her. Jace noticed her armor markings and realized she wasn't just a soldier. She was someone important. Someone her people might be searching for. But he didn't press her with questions. Right now, she needed rest and safety, not interrogation. As they continued forward, the sun began to set behind the damaged mountains, casting long shadows across the land. Sailari studied the horizon with sad eyes, then looked at Jace again. She spoke softly, a tone filled with gratitude. He didn't know her exact words, but the emotion was clear. She no longer saw him as a threat. She saw him as the one who pulled her from death, the one who protected her when she could not move. The one she now stayed close to, not because she was forced, but because she chose to. And even though he didn't say it out loud, Jace already felt a strong sense of responsibility for her. He hadn't meant to capture anyone, but destiny had placed her in his path, and now he felt he had to keep her safe, no matter what dangers lay ahead. He didn't know that their journey together was only beginning. He didn't know that saving her would change both their lives forever. And he didn't know that somewhere in the ruins, enemies had already sensed her awakening and were coming for her. But for now, he walked with her quietly, unaware that this moment would shape the fate of entire worlds. Jace walked slowly through the thick alien forest, supporting Solari as they moved away from the ruined clearing. She still leaned on him, her legs weak from long cryosleep and the injuries she had suffered before being trapped. Her steps were unsteady at first, but she tried her best not to slow him down. Every few minutes, she glanced up at him, as if trying to understand the strange human who had saved her life without asking anything in return. They finally reached a small ridge overlooking a calm valley. The view stretched far, filled with blue-leaf trees and glowing flowers that opened as night approached. Strange creatures chirped softly in the distance. The planet looked peaceful for the first time since Jace landed, and Solari stared at the scene with wide eyes, breathing more calmly. Jace guided her to a spot between two stones and helped her sit. She placed a hand on the ground, feeling the soil, and whispered something in her language. It sounded like thanks and sadness mixed together. Jace set down his pack and took out a small, portable shelter, just a basic field tent that unfolded into a dome. He set it up carefully, making sure she saw every move so she wouldn't feel threatened. Once it was ready, he motioned to her to rest inside. She hesitated, looking uncertain, as if she didn't know whether humans trapped people inside shelters. Jace stepped back, keeping a gentle distance, and pointed at himself, then at the outside ground, showing he would stay out. She blinked slowly, surprised by the gesture, then finally crawled inside and lay down on the soft padding. Her breathing relaxed, though she still watched him from the tent entrance. Jace sat near the opening but not too close, checking his scanner for signs of danger. No hostile life forms nearby. That was good. Solari's voice came out soft, asking something in her language. He shook his head with a small apologetic smile. She frowned, then tried speaking more slowly, touching her chest and repeating her name. Solari. Jace nodded. He tapped his chest gently. Jace. She smiled faintly when he said it, this time without fear. She pointed at one of the glowing flowers nearby, then made a soft ringing sound, mimicking its chime-like hum. She was trying to teach him a word. Jace repeated the sound badly. Solari laughed quiet, soft, but real laughter. She corrected him patiently, tapping her throat to show how to breathe the sound properly. He tried again. Better this time. Her eyes warmed with approval. For a moment, the world felt simple. A human and an alien woman learning each other's sounds under a calm night sky. But Jace didn't miss the way she kept glancing toward the dark horizon, her expression flickering between worry and determination. She was searching for something or someone, and the fear behind her eyes made him feel protective in a way he couldn't explain. Later that night, when Solari finally slept, Jace sat outside the tent, staring at the stars. The scanner on his wrist flickered again, picking up distant pulses of energy far beyond the valley. Not natural. Not random. Something, or someone, was scanning the area. He looked back at the sleeping Solari. Whoever she was, her presence on this wounded planet was no accident. She carried secrets in her eyes, secrets just starting to surface. Jace sighed softly and stayed awake for hours, guarding her until the faint light of dawn touched the valley. When she woke in the morning, she looked stronger. Her injuries still hurt, but the nanites had done good work overnight. She sat up and moved slowly out of the tent. When she saw Jace still watching over her, a quiet shock crossed her face. Maybe she expected him to leave in the night. Instead, he had stayed awake for her sake. She stepped closer and touched his arm lightly, a gentle gesture of gratitude. Then she pointed to the sky and made a sweeping motion downward. Her expression turned serious. She spoke several words, each one filled with urgency. Jace didn't understand the full meaning, but he understood one thing clearly. Someone was coming for her. He packed their supplies quickly. Sailari motioned for him to follow her deeper into the forest, though her steps were slow. She clearly knew the terrain better than he did. After a short walk, she stopped by a massive tree that had fallen long ago. Underneath its roots was a hidden entrance leading to a small underground passage. It looked like an old emergency shelter. She motioned for him to enter. The shelter was small and dim, but inside were old alien supplies, water pods, energy crystals, and a broken communicator. Sailari touched the communicator with trembling fingers, trying to activate it. It sparked weakly, then died. Jace knelt beside it and opened the casing. The parts inside were foreign, but the structure was fixable. After a few adjustments, he connected his human field battery to the power node. The communicator hummed, lighting up faintly. Sailari inhaled sharply, almost relieved. But when she attempted to transmit, the signal failed. A red indicator blinked, showing interference. She looked crushed. Jace placed a comforting hand near her but didn't touch her, giving her space while showing support. She nodded gratefully and sat back against the wall, taking a slow breath. Jace used gestures to ask what happened to her before he found the cryosphere. She hesitated for a long moment, then tapped her armor's emblem, the swirl-like symbol of an ancient royal line. Jace froze. A royal guard. Or maybe someone even more important. That explained her beauty, her strength, her unusual armor design, and why she had been preserved in a high-level cryopod. Her voice lowered, filled with pain, as she explained piece by piece, using gestures and broken words. She drew lines on the dusty ground, showing her ship being attacked. She touched her chest, then pointed upward toward the mountains they had searched for her. Her hand trembled when she mimed a violent explosion. She had fallen. Her squad had been ambushed. She was the only one left, and whoever had attacked her wanted her alive, not dead. Jace's stomach tightened. She hadn't been lost. She had been hunted. He studied her carefully. Her violet eyes were determined now. Not just scared. She wasn't running from her enemies. She was trying to reach her people again. Trying to warn them, trying to finish something important. Sailari reached toward him and placed her hand lightly over her own heart, then touched his arm, a gesture of trust and request. She needed him. She wanted him to help her reach safety. It wasn't a command. It was a choice she offered him. Jace nodded without hesitation. They left the shelter and continued deeper into the forest, heading toward higher ground. Sailari moved faster now, though she still limped slightly. Jace stayed close, ready to catch her if she stumbled. At one point, she tripped over a vine, but Jace caught her gently before she fell. She looked up at him with gratitude but also embarrassment. He shook his head softly, telling her it was fine, and she smiled a little before pulling herself together. As they climbed, the trees thinned, exposing the sky. Jace noticed more signs of technology, faint energy residue, like invisible footprints. Someone had definitely been scanning the area recently. He kept Sailari close, guiding her away from dangerous open spaces. They finally reached a ridge where they could see far across the valley. Sailari's eyes narrowed as she spotted something. 3 small black shapes moved across the distant horizon, hover drones sweeping the area, scanning aggressively. Jace pulled her down behind a rock. The drones passed overhead, humming deeply. Sailari whispered something that sounded worried but calm. She seemed to trust Jace completely now, letting him take the lead when danger approached. He felt a strange sense of pride at that. Her trust meant something important, especially because she wasn't the kind of person who trusted easily. They moved again, this time toward a narrow canyon partially hidden by vines. Sailari pointed to a faint symbol carved into the stone, an old royal code marking a safe path used centuries ago. It led up to a communication tower that had supposedly been destroyed during the war. If they reached it, they might boost a signal far enough for her people to detect. The path was long and rough. Sailari stumbled often, but each time, Jace supported her without complaint. She began to lean into him naturally, no longer with tension or fear. Once, when he slipped on a loose stone, she grabbed his arm quickly to steady him. They exchanged relieved glances, both realizing they were now depending on each other equally. As they neared the canyon entrance, the ground trembled. A blast echoed behind them. The drones had detected something nearby, or someone. The enemies were close now. Too close. Sailari looked at Jace, her eyes fully trusting him. She touched her chest, then his, as if silently telling him they were in this together. Without speaking a word, Jace took her hand gently, guiding her quickly into the hidden canyon. They disappeared into the shadows right before the drones swept past again. Deep in the canyon, with towering cliffs on both sides and the sound of distant danger behind them, their journey entered a new phase, one where their survival depended on each other completely. And though Sailari still feared the enemies who hunted her, she no longer feared the human walking beside her. In fact, she stayed close to him now, not because she was weak, but because she chose him as her protector, and something deeper that she had not yet spoken aloud. Their bond was growing. Their path was narrowing. And the galaxy, without knowing it, was shifting because a human and an alien heir had begun walking together on the same side. The canyon walls rose high above them, trapping the faint light of the sky into thin strips that shimmered across Sailari's silver skin. Jace walked ahead, checking every corner for danger, while making sure Sailari stayed close enough to grab his arm if the ground became unstable. Halfway through the canyon, the path narrowed. The stone floor slanted sharply, and Sailari's foot slipped on a patch of moss. Jace caught her gently before she could fall. She steadied herself, breathing softly, and nodded with quiet thanks. He could tell her strength was returning, but exhaustion still clung to her. They continued deeper until the canyon opened into a wide stone basin surrounded by broken metal towers. Old machinery from a forgotten era lay scattered around, half buried under dust and vines. Sailari's eyes widened as she recognized some of the symbols carved into the beams. She ran her fingers gently over one marking, whispering something that sounded like a prayer. Jace watched her carefully. She looked both relieved and heartbroken, as if this place held memories she wasn't ready to share yet. Jace approached her and lightly tapped his scanner. It showed no hostile life nearby, but faint energy pulses emanated from the structures. He pointed at the largest tower, which leaned slightly but still reached high toward the canyon ceiling. Sailari understood instantly. That tower held the old communication core. If they could activate even part of it, they might be able to broadcast a signal strong enough for her people to detect. She led the way toward the tower entrance, her limp now barely noticeable. Inside, the air smelled of stale metal and dust, but the corridor ahead glowed faintly with surviving energy lines. Sailari touched the wall as they walked. Almost as if she could sense the remaining power deeper inside, they reached the core chamber. A massive circular room with a collapsed roof and shattered consoles along the edges. In the center stood the communication pillar, tall, cracked, but still pulsing with a weak light. Sailari approached it slowly, her expression serious and full of heavy memories. Jace stayed near her but let her take the lead. She placed her hand on a crystal panel near the base. The machine flickered weakly, reacting to her royal signatures. The pillar glowed brighter, rising in power for a moment before dimming again. Sailari frowned and tried again, her fingers trembling slightly. The pillar responded, but the signal sputtered each time. Jace knelt beside the control plate, examining the connections. It was old alien tech, mixed with modern repairs from past wars. He opened a side panel and saw loose wires and damaged energy converters. He reached for his tools. Sailari watched him curiously, unsure if a human could understand such complex alien systems. But as Jace worked, she slowly realized he was not guessing. He understood what each component did. Even if the structure was foreign, his hands moved confidently, reconnecting broken conduits and stabilizing power flow. Sailari leaned closer, amazed. She had expected help from him in many forms, but not this kind of skill. When he tightened the last connector, the machine hummed loudly, sending vibrations through the floor. Sailari placed her hand on the panel again. This time, the pillar lit up fully, sending a beam of blue light upward. She inhaled sharply, eyes glowing with hope. The machine was working. Jace stepped back, letting her initiate the broadcast. She spoke into the interface, her language echoing softly around the chamber. He didn't understand the words, but he recognized the weight behind them, a call for rescue, a warning, and perhaps a farewell if things went wrong. The pillar sent out a pulse so strong that even Jace felt it in his chest. Sailari repeated her message again and again, making sure it carried across the region. Finally, after several minutes, the machine dimmed, its ancient power exhausted. She turned to Jace, breathing heavily but smiling softly. Her eyes were full of relief. She touched her chest, and then the sky, signaling that her message had reached them. Jace nodded with a small smile, but his scanner suddenly beeped loudly. Something had responded, but not from the sky. It came from behind them. Sailari froze, her eyes narrowing as she sensed something wrong. Jace pulled her gently behind a half-collapsed wall and scanned the chamber entrance. Multiple dots appeared on his device, fast-moving, coordinated, and coming directly toward them. The enemies had traced the signal. Sailari grabbed Jace's wrist lightly, pulling him deeper into the shadows. She whispered quickly, pointing at the back exit. Jace nodded, knowing they didn't have time to climb back up the canyon. They slipped out the rear door just as footsteps echoed inside the chamber. Voices filled the cavern, harsh, metallic, and angry. Jace and Sailari moved quickly down a sloping passage, lit only by faint blue cracks in the stone. The tunnel twisted in strange patterns, but Sailari seemed to know the layout by instinct, guiding him with soft gestures. Halfway down, the walls shook violently. A blast rocked the corridor. Dust rained from above, and Sailari stumbled. Jace caught her again, pressing her against the wall to shield her from falling debris. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with worry, but also trust, complete trust. When the shaking stopped, they hurried forward again. The tunnel eventually opened onto a high cliff overlooking a long stretch of jagged rocks far below. A narrow ledge led across the cliffside, but it looked unstable. Jace tested it with his boot. The stone cracked but held. Sailari tightened her grip on his arm, breathing nervously. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. They crossed slowly, step by step, while the wind howled around them. Once, Sailari slipped slightly, but Jace pulled her close before she could fall. She held onto him for a moment, her forehead resting against his chest, gathering strength. When she pulled away, she whispered something soft, a word he had learned to recognize. It meant, "Thank you," in her language. When they finally reached solid ground, Jace noticed a distant glow in the sky, soft, almost invisible. But Sailari saw it clearly. Her eyes widened with hope. Her people had received the signal. But they weren't the only ones. Jace's scanner showed enemy movement closing in from 2 directions. Sailari looked at him, her expression turning serious again. She tapped her chest, then his. The meaning was clear. She wasn't leaving without him. They ran together toward a small plateau that overlooked the lower valley. From there, they could see the forest stretching wide, and at its center, several black shapes moved quickly, enemy soldiers emerging from hidden dropships. Sailari's breath shook slightly. She pointed toward a path leading downward. They could hide there. Before they moved, Sailari rested her hand on his arm, her eyes showing vulnerability. She said a few words slowly, as if trying hard to make him understand. Jace listened carefully and finally recognized 2 of the words, chosen and trust. She was telling him something important, something personal. He nodded, placing his hand gently over hers, promising silently that he wasn't abandoning her. Then a sudden flash split the sky. A bright streak descended, illuminating the clouds with gold and silver light. Sailari gasped, her eyes shining. She gripped Jace's hand tightly. It wasn't enemy fire. It was her people. A royal shuttle broke through the clouds, its wings glowing like blades of light. The symbol on the hull matched the markings on Sailari's armor. She covered her mouth with trembling hands, overwhelmed with relief, but her smile faded quickly when she saw the enemy forces rushing toward the landing point. Jace didn't wait. He pulled her forward. They ran as fast as their legs allowed, descending the slope, dodging fallen trees and broken metal remains. Sailari pushed herself harder than before, despite her injuries. She wanted to reach her people before it was too late, but the enemy soldiers reached the clearing first. Jace stopped abruptly behind a large stone wall, pulling Sailari down beside him. They watched as enemy troops surrounded the royal shuttle. The shuttle's doors opened slowly, and Sailari's expression tightened with fear. She whispered the name of someone important, maybe a relative, maybe a guardian, someone she couldn't lose. Jace turned to her. She looked at him with desperate eyes that silently begged for help. He already knew what she wanted. He nodded. They moved quietly along the edge of the clearing, using shadows for cover. Jace counted the enemies quickly, too many for a direct attack, but he noticed something. The shuttle's stabilizer rods were powering up again. Maybe the pilots inside were trying to lift off. Sailari pointed at a control relay near the enemy soldiers. It was connected to jamming devices, preventing communication and escape. If Jace could disable it, the shuttle might break free. He turned to Sailari. She touched his face lightly, her eyes full of worry. He squeezed her hand gently, promising he would return. Then he moved. Jace slipped through the trees, staying low, completely silent. He reached the relay and began working quickly. Sparks flew, and the device flickered. One more wire. One more. A soldier spotted him. Jace ducked behind the relay as blaster fire hit the ground near his feet. Sailari cried out softly from the shadows but held herself back, trusting him. Jace ripped the final connector free. The relay exploded with a burst of light. The jamming effect vanished instantly. The shuttle engines roared. Royal soldiers inside activated defense shields, pushing enemy troops back. Sailari ran toward the opening ramp, calling out with shaking voice. A royal guard, older, armor marked with gold, stepped out and froze in shock when he saw her. But before Sailari could reach him, an enemy soldier aimed a weapon at her back. Jace moved faster than thought. He threw himself between them, blocking the shot with a metal panel he had grabbed from the ground. The energy blast hit the panel and scattered. The royal guard shouted orders, and their reinforcements surged forward, overwhelming the enemy quickly. Sailari grabbed Jace's arm tightly, shaking with relief. She pulled him toward the shuttle, as her people surrounded them with protective formation. Jace had saved her again, but he didn't realize that this moment, witnessed by dozens of royal eyes, would change everything. Because Sailari didn't just see him as her protector now, she saw him as the person she chose, and soon, her entire people would know it. The roar of the shuttle engines filled the air as royal guards formed a tight circle around Sailari and Jace. Dust swirled everywhere, mixing with bright light from the ship's landing thrusters. Jace kept one arm protectively near Sailari as they moved up the ramp. She held his sleeve tightly, refusing to let go even when her people reached for her with desperate joy. Her steps trembled with emotion, but she stayed close to him, making sure he understood she wanted him with her. Inside the shuttle, the door sealed shut behind them, muting the chaos outside. The sounds of enemy fire faded as the ship lifted from the ground. Sailari stood still for a long moment, staring at the familiar interior walls, marked with royal symbols, glowing panels, and guards bowing their heads in deep respect. She swallowed hard, overwhelmed, then turned slowly toward an older man in elegant armor, who approached her with tears in his eyes. "Sailari," he whispered in their language, voice breaking. He placed both hands on her shoulders, checking her injuries, his hands shaking. She spoke softly, telling him she was alive because of the human beside her. The guard finally looked at Jace. His eyes widened with shock when he realized a human had fought through danger to protect their lost heir. The guard straightened, then bowed his head deeply to Jace. Jace blinked. Unsure what to do, he simply nodded awkwardly. The guard spoke again, sounding formal and full of gratitude. Sailari translated with gestures. touching her heart, then motioning toward Jace. She was telling the guard the truth that Jace had saved her more than once. More guards approached, whispering among themselves, staring at Jace with disbelief and surprise. They had never seen a human so close to royalty. They had never imagined one would be trusted by an heir. For a moment, Jace felt out of place, surrounded by tall, graceful alien warriors who all wore the same noble markings as Sailari. But every time doubt touched him, Sailari stepped closer, silently reminding him he belonged here beside her. A healer approached her and offered to tend to her wounds. Sailari allowed the healer to work but refused to rest away from Jace. Instead, she sat beside him on a cushioned bench, leaning back slightly as the healer repaired her armor and applied patches to her skin. She kept glancing at Jace with soft eyes, as if checking to make sure he didn't disappear the moment she looked away. As the engines steadied, the shuttle flew toward a large royal flagship waiting in orbit. Jace stared at the huge vessel through the window. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Glowing rings rotating slowly around a long, elegant body, with energy flowing like golden rivers along its surface. Sailari watched him quietly, smiling at his awe. She whispered the ship's name with pride. He repeated it carefully, and she laughed softly when he said it almost correctly. The shuttle docked smoothly. When the doors opened, a group of high-ranking officials waited outside, dressed in long robes with shimmering patterns. Sailari stepped out first, her posture straight despite her exhaustion. The officials bowed deeply, some even placing their palms to the floor in reverence. But when they noticed Jace walking behind her, whispers spread like a wave through the corridor. A human, walking beside an heir. Not chained, not guarded, protected by the heir herself. Sailari lifted her hand, signaling them to stop speaking. Her expression was calm, but strong. She spoke several clear, firm words that echoed through the hall. The officials stiffened, surprised by her tone. She was defending him. She was declaring him under her protection. Jace didn't know the exact translation, but the meaning was obvious from the way the officials lowered their heads immediately and stepped back respectfully. She led Jace down the hallway herself, ignoring the shock in everyone's faces. They entered a large chamber filled with tall windows showing the stars. This was likely a council room or royal meeting hall. Sailari stood in the center, her posture calm but full of deep determination. More nobles gathered around, their eyes fixed on her. The oldest noble, wearing robes of deep gold, spoke first. His tone was emotional, asking questions rapidly. Sailari listened respectfully, then opened her hand toward Jace. She explained everything in her steady, clear voice. Every word she spoke made the nobles stare harder at Jace, first in disbelief, then in slowly growing respect. Because Sailari told them the truth. Jace had protected her from the moment she awoke. He had shielded her in battle, fixed ancient systems, and risked himself without asking for reward. And she trusted him completely. The gold-robed elder turned to Jace and nodded deeply, his voice slower, gentler. Sailari translated the final part for him in simple gestures. They were thankful, and they recognized him as a companion of the heir. For a moment, Jace didn't know how to respond. He simply placed a hand on his chest and bowed his head slightly. Sailari's lips curved into a soft smile. She looked proud, prouder than he had ever seen her. Later, when the council dispersed to prepare messages for allied fleets, Sailari brought Jace to a quieter balcony that overlooked the glowing rings of the ship. She stood beside him, hands resting lightly on the railing, her hair drifting gently in the soft artificial breeze. For a long moment, she said nothing. She simply looked at the stars, breathing deeply. Then she turned to him and spoke his name softly. Her voice was warm, full of emotion. She reached toward him, touching the sleeve of his uniform. Slowly, carefully, she brought her hand to her chest and said a word he had heard earlier. He looked confused, so she tried again, speaking more slowly, more clearly. He repeated the word hesitantly. She smiled, eyes glowing like amethyst. The word meant chosen. Sailari took his hand gently and placed it over her heart. A gesture so intimate in her culture that even the guards nearby gasped. She whispered something long and beautiful. Jace didn't understand the full sentence, but he felt the meaning in her voice. She wasn't just thanking him. She wasn't just trusting him. She was declaring him as her chosen partner in front of her people. Jace swallowed hard, stunned. He had only wanted to keep her safe. He hadn't expected something like this. Solari watched his expression carefully. She wasn't pushing him. She wasn't forcing him. She was offering, giving him the chance to refuse if he wished. But Jace didn't pull away. He placed his other hand gently over hers, and nodded once, slow, steady, full of sincerity. Sayalari's breath caught softly. Her eyes glimmered with emotion. She leaned close, and rested her forehead lightly against his, a gesture of unity in her culture. The guards, witnessing the moment, bowed their heads, accepting the bond that had been formed before their eyes. Later that night, the flagship prepared for departure. Sayalari guided Jace to the royal observation deck, where hundreds of her people gathered to see their heir safe and alive. When she stepped forward with Jace beside her, the crowd erupted in awe. A wave of light passed through them as they lifted their glowing symbols, a sign of acceptance. Sayalari lifted Jace's hand and intertwined her fingers with his. The crowd bowed deeply. Jace didn't understand every custom or every word, but he understood the feeling that settled into his chest. He belonged here. Not because he captured someone, not because he claimed anyone by force, but because Sayalari chose him, trusted him, and stood beside him in front of her entire people. As the flagship rose toward the stars, Sayalari leaned against his shoulder, whispering softly. He didn't understand the language yet, but he felt the meaning clearly. She was safe. He was welcome. And for the first time in both their lives, the galaxy wasn't something to fear, it was something they would face together. Their story had begun with danger and misunderstanding, but it ended not with ownership or force, but with a bond freely chosen by them both. A bond strong enough to change everything around them. And far beyond the ship's glowing rings, the galaxy shifted quietly, preparing for the future shaped by a human and the alien heir who had chosen him as her own.